I'm about to share something I've kept buried in my mind for years. Maybe writing it down will give me some peace. But let me warn you, if you're the kind of person who likes to walk alone in forests, especially ones with tall, ancient trees, you might want to stop reading now. My name is Eddie, but everyone always called me Ed. I grew up in a small town in rural Maine, surrounded by hills and dense forests. It was a quiet place where the biggest scandals were gossip about who was dating who or who owed money at the general store. But in 2005, when I was 17, something happened. Something I've never been able to explain. Something that completely changed my life. It all started with Ryan's disappearance. He was a kid my age, a bit scrawny, and always wore his baseball cap backward. We weren't close friends, but he was part of our basketball group at school. He vanished one Friday on his way home. His mom said he'd left early because he wasn't feeling well, but he never made it back. The whole town came together to search for him, but there was no sign of Ryan anywhere. A week later, Jessica disappeared. This time, it was in the woods near the old abandoned power plant, a spot we called Snake Falls. She was with a group of friends, but wandered off to take some pictures with her new phone. When they realized she wasn't around, they started calling her. Nothing. The search ramped up, but we found nothing. No footprints, no signs of a struggle. Just her phone, lying in the middle of the dry leaves. Things got strange after that. People in town swore they'd seen a tall, very tall figure walking among the trees at night. Some kids talked about a faceless man who showed up in their dreams, always wearing a black suit. I thought it was just people getting spooked, until the day I saw it. And, my friend, everything changed. It was a hot July night. My buddy Derek suggested we head to Snake Falls to drink a few beers away from prying eyes. He brought along Mike and Rachel, our usual crew. We wanted to unwind, forget about the rumors and the disappearances. But I remember, even before leaving home, I felt a tightness in my chest. Something told me we shouldn't go. I ignored it. We arrived close to midnight. The falls were deserted, as always. We sat on the rocks, cracked open some beers, and started talking. The sound of the water cascading down was soothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, hidden in the shadows. Rachel noticed it first. "Do you guys see that?" she asked, pointing toward the trees on the other side of the creek. At first, I thought she was joking, but when I looked, my heart stopped. There was something there. Something tall, thin, with impossibly long arms. I couldn't see its face. In fact, it seemed like it didn't have one. It just stood there, completely still, like it was part of the forest. "What the hell is that?" Derek whispered, slowly standing up. Before we could react, it moved. Not like a person, though. It was as if it glided across the ground, soundlessly. Within seconds, it was on the other side of the creek. We froze. The air around us turned icy, and a deafening hum filled my ears. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Rachel was the first to run. Then Mike. Derek and I were left behind, still rooted to the spot. When I finally managed to move, I grabbed Derek's arm, and we ran as fast as we could. But that thing was behind us. I could feel its presence, like a massive shadow closing in. I don't know how we made it out of the forest. By the time we reached town, Derek was as pale as a ghost. Rachel and Mike were shaken too. We tried telling other people, but who would believe us? They said it was the heat, that we'd had too much to drink. But I knew. We all knew. After that night, things were never the same. Derek moved away. Rachel started having terrible nightmares and eventually checked herself into a hospital. Mike disappeared a few months later, just like Ryan and Jessica. And me, I still hear that hum in my ears sometimes. I still see tall shadows out of the corner of my eye, even when I'm indoors. I don't know what it was. Maybe I never will. But I can tell you this. If you ever hear stories about a faceless man in a black suit and see him among the trees, run. Run and don't look back. Because he's real, and he doesn't forget who's seen him. When I think back to the worst day of my life, the day my world shattered into pieces, it feels like I'm watching a grainy, old VHS tape. The colors too dark, the sound distorted, and everything just a little out of focus. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know. Maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you won't. But I lost the person I loved most in this world, and I know who took her, or what took her. It started in the summer of 2008. Jen and I had been together for 3 years. We met in college, one of those cliches where the shy history major falls for the confident art student. She was light to my dark, always pulling me out of my own head with her infectious laugh and endless curiosity. After graduation, we rented a little house in Fairfield, Connecticut. It wasn't much, but it was ours. She painted in the sunroom, and I worked at the local library. Life was simple, good, until that summer. Jen had taken up photography. She loved capturing the untamed beauty of nature, gnarled tree roots, dew-covered spiderwebs, the way the light cut through the forest in golden shards. She spent hours wandering the woods behind our house, always coming back with stories about the magic she'd found. Sometimes I'd go with her, but I've never been much of a nature guy. I preferred the dusty comfort of books. One evening, she came home with a strange look on her face. Her cheeks were flushed, her hands trembling as she held up her camera. "Ed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you have to see this." I took the camera and scrolled through the photos. At first, it was the usual sunlight filtering through leaves, a squirrel mid-leap. But then, there it was. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing in the shadows between two trees. Its arms hung unnaturally long at its sides, and it wore what looked like a dark suit. But the face? There was no face. Just a pale, blank expanse where a face should have been. "It's probably just some kind of optical illusion," I said, though my voice wavered. "A trick of the light." Jen shook her head. "I saw it, Ed. It was standing there, watching me." I didn't know what to say. The photo unsettled me, but I didn't want to scare her. I told her to stay out of the woods for a while, and she agreed reluctantly. But Jen was never good at staying away from the things that fascinated her. Over the next few weeks, I noticed changes in her. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, saying she'd had nightmares about the man in the suit. She became distracted, forgetful. Her once vibrant laughter grew quiet, like she was carrying some invisible weight. And then there were the drawings. I found them scattered across her art desk one morning, charcoal sketches of that faceless figure, its impossibly long arms reaching out like shadows. In some of the drawings, it stood in the woods. In others, it loomed over a small house that looked eerily like ours. "Jen, this is..." I trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Why are you drawing this?" She looked at me with hollow eyes. "I don't know. I can't stop. It feels like it's in my head." I wanted to help her, but I didn't know how. I thought about calling a therapist, but what would I even say? My girlfriend thinks she's being haunted by a faceless man from the woods. It sounded ridiculous. So I did nothing, and that was my first mistake. One night, I woke up to find Jen's side of the bed empty. Panic clawed at my chest as I stumbled through the house. calling her name. The back door was open, the cool night air seeping in. I grabbed a flashlight and ran into the woods, my heart pounding in my ears. "Jen," I shouted, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. "Where are you?" The woods were eerily silent, the usual chorus of crickets and owls absent. And then I saw her. She was standing in a clearing, her back to me. And he was there too, the figure from her photos and drawings, standing just a few feet away from her. His arms stretched toward her, unnaturally long and grotesque. "Jen, run," I screamed. She didn't move. It was like she was in a trance, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I charged forward, desperate to reach her, but the moment I stepped into the clearing, the air turned heavy. It felt like I was wading through molasses, every step a monumental effort. And that's when the hum started, a low, droning sound that rattled my skull and made my vision blur. The figure turned its blank face toward me, and for a moment, I felt like I was falling into an endless void. My knees buckled, and I hit the ground hard. When I looked up, Jen was gone. The figure was gone. The clearing was empty. I don't remember how I made it back to the house. The next few days were a blur of police reports and search parties. Everyone asked the same questions. Was she unhappy? Did she have a reason to leave? I tried to tell them about the figure, but the words caught in my throat. Who would believe me? Weeks turned into months, and still there was no sign of her. The house felt like a tomb, every corner haunted by her absence. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I could hear her voice calling my name. I'd find myself staring at the edge of the woods, hoping she'd come walking out, smiling like nothing had happened. But she never did. I don't go into the woods anymore. I've tried to move on, but the memories won't let me. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of something tall and thin out of the corner of my eye, just beyond the trees. And sometimes, late at night, I'll hear that hum low and droning, like a swarm of bees inside my skull. I don't know what took Jen, but I know it's still out there, watching, waiting. If you ever see him, the tall man in the woods with no face run, don't look back. And whatever you do, don't let him into your mind, because once he's there, he never lets go. I can't really tell you where to start with this, because when I think about it, the first thing I remember is just sitting there in that dark room, staring out the window. Everything felt off. Like I wasn't really there, you know? It's like I was watching everything happen from a distance, just waiting for something. The night was quieter than usual, and the streetlights, which always flickered nonstop, were out. I'd grown up in that neighborhood. Small, kind of isolated, but safe. At least, that's what I thought. Even now, sitting alone, it was hard to believe something could be wrong. But something was. Something wasn't right. The reason I came back here? Simple. Life pushed me back. I didn't want to come, but sometimes things just drag you to the same places you swore you'd never return to. And honestly, I hated that house. I hated it for years. But here I was. I couldn't get away from it. The ticking of the wall clock, something that used to be comforting, felt louder than ever. Every tick seemed like a hammer to my brain. Every second was a warning I couldn't shake. The clock ticked louder, the silence around me growing. I stood up suddenly. It was like something was watching me, but not with eyes. Something without a face. Something waiting for its chance. I checked the door. Thought I heard something outside, but when I went to look, there was nothing. No one. Just the darkness. And it was like the darkness was swallowing everything. I'd heard the stories about Slenderman. Knew what it was, but I never really thought it was real. I thought it was just some creepy myth people told to scare kids. But then I started to notice. It wasn't just a story. He was out there, watching me, waiting for his moment. Things didn't feel right from the start, but it took me a while to actually put it all together. When I was younger, I used to run around this neighborhood with friends. It was a peaceful place, at least that's what I thought at the time. But after everything that happened, looking back, I'm not so sure it ever was. There's always something in the back of your mind, a nagging feeling that you just can't shake. That's how I felt now. My old place was just a couple blocks away from here. That's what brought me back. The place felt familiar, but somehow that made everything worse. Every window I passed felt like it was watching me. Every creak in the floor was a warning. When I went to the old grocery store down the block, I could have sworn I saw someone who looked like a younger version of my brother. But when I turned around, they were gone. It's like time itself was playing tricks on me. I don't talk to many people anymore, but I used to. Not much family left, just distant relatives who have their own lives to live. I have one friend, though, a guy named Dean. He's one of those folks you don't see too often, but when you do, it feels like no time has passed. We've known each other since high school, and even after all the weird stuff, he's the only one I feel like I can talk to about things. I'd call him up now, just to get his opinion, but something stopped me. I didn't want to drag him into this. What if it wasn't real? What if it was all in my head? The last thing I needed was for him to think I was losing it. Hell, maybe I was. Maybe it's just all those sleepless nights catching up with me, making my mind play tricks. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Something was wrong. And I think Dean knew that too. I remember talking to him once about Slenderman. He didn't believe in it, of course. He was the logical type, always dismissing my crazy theories. But the more I think about it, the more I'm sure he knows something. Not about the thing itself, but about the way it's always been in the background, always lurking. I didn't want to admit it at first, but I was starting to see things. Little things. Shadows out of the corner of my eye, shapes that shouldn't be there. Nothing overt, but enough to make my skin crawl. It was the same feeling I had when I was a kid, right before. Well, right before things got bad. When you're a kid, you don't really know what's real. And maybe that's what's screwing with me now. Maybe it's all just some echo from the past. Or maybe it's not. One night, I was walking back from the gas station when it happened. It was late, the streets empty, the air cold enough to bite. I was halfway down the block when I saw something. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the streetlight, maybe a shadow cast by the trees lining the sidewalk. But then, it moved. Not in the way a shadow does, but in a way that was unnatural. My heart slammed in my chest, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I'm not the type to run, but my legs were already turning to jelly. I stared at the figure. It didn't move toward me, but it didn't move away either. It was just standing there, in the dark, watching me. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. A trick. I was imagining things. But then, I saw it again, the next night. Same place. Same figure. This time, though, it was closer. So close I could see. Eyes? It was hard to make out the details, like it was standing just out of focus, but I could swear it was watching me, studying me. I froze, felt the blood drain from my face. The thing didn't move. It didn't need to. And then, just like that, I turned away. I didn't want to look anymore, but I could feel it, right behind me, like it was waiting for me to take that first step. I didn't even realize I was walking faster, pushing my feet harder into the pavement until I felt my legs burning. I was halfway home before I dared to look behind me. Nothing, but I could feel it still, the weight of its gaze. Days passed, and the figure started to appear more frequently. At first, I tried to convince myself I was just seeing things: stress, lack of sleep, the usual. But the unease started to fester. I knew it was real, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only getting closer. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. They'd think I was crazy. My friends, my family, they'd dismiss it, laugh it off. I tried to talk about it once to a guy I used to work with, James. He had a way of listening, like he got it. But even when I said it, I could tell he wasn't really hearing me. Not really. Man, it's all in your head. You've been working too hard. Probably stressed out about that job you're always griping about. Maybe he was right. It didn't help that I'd been feeling more isolated lately. My job was draining, and my relationship with Kate, well, it was fine, but it wasn't great. We weren't connecting the way we used to. She'd gone off to a work thing in Chicago, and when she came back, I just felt distant, like we were two strangers who happened to live together. One night, after another strange encounter with the figure, I got a call. It was Kate. I hadn't spoken to her all day, but she'd been texting earlier. I could tell from her voice that something was off. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice tight like she was holding something back. I told her I was fine, but I wasn't. I hadn't been fine for a while now. The figure was getting closer, and it was starting to make me feel like I wasn't safe in my own skin. But I wasn't going to tell her that. I wasn't going to let her think I was losing it. I just wanted to check in. I'm worried about you, she added, her voice softening. That was when I realized something. Kate hadn't seemed this concerned in a while. Maybe it was the stress of her work trip, or maybe she knew something I didn't. Maybe she saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. But I didn't ask. I couldn't ask. I didn't want to know. And as I hung up, I felt a shift. A pull. I wasn't sure if it was the figure's presence, or if it was something else, but for the first time, I thought about what would happen if I didn't tell Kate the truth. What would happen if I just kept pretending? Could I keep this up? Or would it break me first? The next day, it all came to a head. I had been driving home from work, distracted, my mind tangled with thoughts of the figure and Kate. The stress of it all had been building, gnawing at me like a slow burn. The drive should have been routine, but something about it felt off, like the world around me had shifted just slightly out of sync. The sky was cloudy, a dull gray, and I could feel the temperature dropping even inside the car. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white. I looked in the rearview mirror, nothing. But then it happened. I saw him, the figure, not in the mirror, but right there, in the street behind me, walking at a pace that almost matched mine. I tried to focus on the road, tried to shake it off, but my eyes kept darting back. He was still there, moving closer, like he was walking just behind me. Panic shot through me. My breath quickened. I turned onto a side street, hoping to lose him, but the car felt like it was being pulled down a narrow, claustrophobic tunnel. The streets seemed darker than they should have been, and I was starting to lose my grip on reality. Every turn felt wrong, like I was driving into something I didn't understand. I glanced back again. This time, I saw his face, though it wasn't really his face. It was just empty, like a void, a blank canvas where features should have been. It was then I realized that I couldn't escape. This wasn't just a man. This was something else, something that had been following me for much longer than I had ever known. I slammed my foot on the brakes, heart pounding in my chest, and turned the wheel sharply, skidding to the side of the road. The car came to a stop, engine still running. For a moment, I sat there in silence, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, wondering if I had lost my mind. But then, just before I could get out of the car, the figure appeared in the side mirror. He was standing just a few feet away, staring straight at me. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the figure was gone. Vanished. Disappeared into the night like smoke in the wind. I sat frozen for what felt like hours. The image of his empty face burned into my mind. My hand was still gripping the steering wheel, but I couldn't move. Couldn't think. And then I heard the phone ringing. It was Kate. I answered the phone on autopilot. Kate's voice came through, sounding distant, strained, as if she had been trying to reach me for hours. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice quivering slightly. "You sounded off earlier. What's going on?" I leaned back against the seat, staring at the empty street outside. The air felt colder, the silence heavier. I couldn't shake the image of the figure standing right there, inches from me. My mind raced in circles, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no logic to it. Kate. I don't know. My voice was barely above a whisper. I could feel the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on me. There was someone, or something, following me. And I saw him again, Kate. I saw his face. It was nothing. It was just a blank face. I think it was him. The man from the other night, silence on the other end. "David, you need to calm down," she said slowly, trying to be the voice of reason. "You're exhausted. You're overthinking it. You're just imagining things. Please, come home. We'll figure this out. Just come home. Home." The word felt distant, disconnected. How could I go back there? How could I go back to something that felt like it was slipping through my fingers? No, I don't think I can. I can't explain it, but I don't feel safe anywhere anymore. I feel like he's always there, watching me. Everywhere, I heard her sigh, a mix of concern and frustration. "David, I can't keep doing this. You need help. This isn't just some random guy. This is you losing it. I'm scared too. But you need to talk to someone. Please." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. She was right. I needed help. But I couldn't face it. Not yet. Not until I knew what was real and what wasn't. "I'll come home, okay?" I said, barely believing it myself. "But I need you to promise me something. Don't let him in. If he shows up, if you see him, don't open the door. Don't let him get to you. David, you're scaring me," she whispered. "We'll talk when you get here." I hung up, staring at the phone, the weight of her words sinking in. She was scared of me now. She didn't understand. How could she? How could anyone? I started the car again, but the drive home felt endless. Every shadow in my peripheral vision seemed to twitch. Every passing figure seemed to follow me for a moment too long. The world outside the car had begun to blur, like I was living in a half-dream, unable to distinguish what was real. I pulled into the driveway, the house dark and quiet. I sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering what little strength I had left. Then I stepped out. The door opened before I even knocked. Kate stood there, pale, eyes wide with fear. "David," her voice trembled. I think he's here." I froze at the door, staring at Kate. The air felt thin, as if the world around me was holding its breath. She stepped aside, her eyes darting nervously to the dark hallway behind her. It felt like we were in a nightmare, trapped in some liminal space where nothing made sense and the walls pressed in too tightly. "Kate," I muttered, voice tight. "What do you mean he's here?" She closed the door behind me, glancing over her shoulder. I don't know. I heard something outside. A knock, maybe. Or a tap. And when I looked out the window, she trailed off, her face pale under the faint light of the living room lamp. He was standing across the street, my stomach twisted. It was impossible, right? There was no way. No way that this figure, this faceless man could have found his way here to my home. He was supposed to be just a part of my mind, a fear I couldn't shake. But standing in front of me, watching Kate tremble, I knew better. It wasn't just in my head. I stepped forward, grabbing her by the arm gently. "Listen to me. He can't get to us. Not if we stay inside. Keep the doors locked. Stay calm." But as I said it, I realized I didn't believe it. How could I? This wasn't something we could keep out with locks or reason. Something deeper, something darker, was at play. I led her to the kitchen, where the light was warmer, but the tension in the air didn't let up. "Kate," I said quietly, "we need to do something. I don't know what, but I can't keep pretending like this isn't real." Her eyes met mine, soft, but filled with concern. "David, this isn't you. You're not thinking straight. You've been through so much, and you're scared. But you can't face this alone." I shook my head. "I'm not scared. I'm just trying to figure out what's happening. But if this is real, if he's really here, then we have to act before it's too late." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw the Kate I remembered. The one who would stand by me no matter what, even when the world seemed to fall apart. "Okay," she said, her voice firm now. "We'll figure it out. Together." She reached for the phone. I didn't want to call the police, didn't want to involve anyone else. But I knew this wasn't something we could solve ourselves. "Let's at least call someone," Kate said, her tone gentle but insistent. "Maybe they can help us understand what's going on." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the phone. Calling for help felt like admitting defeat. But in that moment, something inside me clicked. We had to face it. We had to stop running, stop hiding. Maybe this wasn't something I could control, but I couldn't let it destroy everything else in my life. "I'll call," I said finally, taking the phone from her. "But we need to be ready for whatever happens next." I dialed the number, the seconds stretching into an eternity. When the voice on the other end picked up, I was already shaking. 911, what's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. "Someone's outside my house," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "I don't know who they are. I think they're trying to get in." The phone call ended quickly. The dispatcher said help was on the way, but I didn't feel any safer. My pulse was racing, and every creak in the house made my heart stop. Kate sat quietly beside me, her eyes fixed on the front door, as if expecting it to burst open at any second. We didn't speak. There was no need. The silence between us felt heavier than the weight of the night. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound, a constant reminder that the world outside was carrying on as normal while we were trapped in this strange, unexplainable nightmare. "I should have known," I muttered, breaking the silence. "I should have known he'd find me here. There's no escaping it, is there?" Kate didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. "We can't keep running, David. You know that, right? Running hasn't worked. Hiding hasn't worked. We have to face it." I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the anger, the panic, the overwhelming feeling of helplessness. "I don't know how," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what he wants or why he's doing this." She stood up and walked to the window, her back to me. I could see her reflection in the glass, her features tense, every muscle in her body coiled tight. "But we do know something," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We know he's not human, and we know he's here for something. Maybe he's here for you. Maybe he's here for both of us." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle into my chest. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept the idea that this man, this faceless thing, was some kind of supernatural force. But deep down, I knew she was right. The doorbell rang. My heart leaped in my chest. The sound was so sudden, so sharp, that it felt like a punch to the gut. I turned to Kate, my eyes wide with terror. She gave a small, nervous nod, as if silently agreeing that we couldn't hide anymore. It was time. We had no choice but to face whatever was on the other side of that door. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, then walked slowly toward the door, every step feeling like I was walking toward my doom. Kate followed behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence, even if her fear was just as palpable as mine. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could turn it, I froze. The feeling of eyes on me, no, it wasn't just a feeling. I knew someone was watching, waiting. My stomach twisted with dread. I could feel the air around me grow heavy, like something was pressing down from above, squeezing the very life out of the room. Kate's hand touched my shoulder, her voice barely audible. "Don't open it," but the doorbell rang again. And this time, the voice from the other side wasn't a stranger's. It was his. I couldn't move. The voice on the other side of the door was unmistakable. That same, hollow voice from years ago, the one I thought was just a memory. But it wasn't. It was here, now. "David." "Open the door." I stood frozen. My thoughts were spinning, too tangled to make sense of. The last time I heard that voice, I was a kid. It was a memory, a nightmare I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. But now it wasn't a memory. It was real. He was real. And whatever he wanted, he was close. Kate's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Don't listen to him. It's not him, David. It's something else," but I couldn't ignore the way he said my name. The calm, chilling cadence of it. It had to be him. No one else would know how to call me like that, with that weight of history between us. The doorbell rang again. This time longer. It wasn't impatient. It was almost like a signal. I moved, almost instinctively, away from Kate. My feet were leaden, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand gripped the doorknob, cold and slick with sweat. The seconds felt like hours. The air around us thickened, and I could hear the faint sound of something moving just beyond the door. Something breathing. "David," the voice came again, softer this time. "It's time." I pulled the door open. There was nothing. No one. Just the empty porch, bathed in the dim light from the porch lamp. My heart slammed in my chest, but I couldn't stop myself from stepping outside. I was drawn to the shadows at the edge of the yard, the dark spaces where nothing should be. It was as if something was waiting, beckoning me, pulling me toward it. "David," Kate shouted from behind me. "Don't," but I was already moving. My feet carried me forward as if some invisible force was pushing me, pulling me closer to the shadows. I could hear Kate calling out for me, but it was distant now, her voice muffled by the thick air that seemed to surround me. I couldn't look back. I couldn't let myself think. All I knew was that I had to find him. I had to face him. The shadows shifted, and there, standing at the edge of the yard, I saw him. His face was still a blur, The same inescapable nothingness that had haunted my dreams for years. I couldn't make out a single feature, but I knew it was him. I knew. The wind picked up, swirling around me, tugging at my clothes, at my thoughts. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. I could feel him in every part of me, the tension building, my heart hammering in my chest, the air vibrating with something ancient, something terrible. David. His voice whispered through the air, but this time, it wasn't a plea. It was a command. My legs moved again, but this time, I was in control. I walked toward him, each step heavy, like wading through water, the earth beneath me seeming to pull me deeper into the ground. I reached out a hand, but my fingers trembled as they neared him. Before I could touch him, his hand shot out, grabbing mine with an impossible strength. His grip burned like ice, but I couldn't pull away. And then, as if everything clicked into place, I understood. There was no escape. I woke up gasping, hands tangled in the sheets, heart racing. The room was still, too still. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the faint ticking of the clock. It was just a dream, I told myself. It had to be. I was safe, but something felt wrong. The air was too thick, too heavy, like it had been stretched and pulled too tight. I sat up, scanning the room. Nothing. No shadows lurking in the corners. No whisperers clawing at my thoughts. I reached for the lamp beside the bed, flicking it on, the light cutting through the darkness like a blade. The normalcy of the room settled around me, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. But then I saw it. There on the floor by the door was a single piece of paper. It was folded neatly, the edges crisp and sharp, as though it had been placed with careful precision. My stomach dropped. I didn't remember seeing it there before. Didn't remember hearing the door open or anyone coming in. I picked it up with trembling hands, unfolding it slowly. My breath caught in my throat when I read the words scrawled across the paper in uneven handwriting. It's not over, David. We're still waiting. I stared at the note for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced, the world around me spinning, the silence deafening. I wanted to scream, to throw the paper away, to run, but I couldn't move. Not this time. The door to my room creaked open. I didn't turn around. The sun rose outside the window, casting long shadows across the floor, but I wasn't sure it made any difference anymore. The light felt wrong. Every day, I kept waiting for something, some sign, some way to make sense of it all, but I never found it. All I knew for certain now was this: the past doesn't stay buried. It waits. It watches. And when you least expect it, it comes for you. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be.